A man in purple robes walks away from the throne of the world, not in chains, not in defeat. By choice. He had ruled Rome for 21 years. He had survived what killed 70 emperors before him. And now, on a quiet day in 305 AD, he simply steps down, goes home to grow cabbages by the sea. 3 years later, the empire he saved is tearing itself apart. 4 emperors, 1 throne, a civil war he engineered without meaning to. He sits in his garden in Split and watches it burn from a distance. The greatest reformer Rome ever produced. The architect of his own undoing. The man who saved an empire by inventing a system. The man who destroyed an empire by trusting that system to outlive him. This is the story they don't tell you in the highlight reels of Roman history. The emperor who walked away. The cabbages that mocked a throne. Because Diocletian had solved an impossible problem. He just never asked what would happen when he wasn't there to hold it together. And by the time he asked, it was already too late. The Roman Empire he inherited was not the empire of marble statues and gleaming legions you see in films. It was a corpse still walking. 50 years of chaos. Generals murdering generals, emperors lasting months, sometimes weeks. Historians call this period the crisis of the 3rd century. To the people living through it, it had no name. It was just the way the world was ending. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome went through more than 50 claimants to the throne. Most died by the sword. Almost none died of old age. Cities were burning. The currency was collapsing. The Persians had captured a Roman emperor alive and used him, by some accounts, as a footstool. This was the world a soldier from the Balkans walked into, a man born to slaves or freedmen, depending on which ancient source you trust. His name then was Diocles. He had no famous father, no senatorial bloodline, just a sharp mind and a sharper sword. He was born around 244 AD in Dalmatia, on the coast of what is now Croatia. His family had nothing. His future, on paper, was less than nothing. The villages there were small, harsh, and forgotten. Olive groves clinging to limestone hills. Fishermen mending nets in the salt wind. But Rome in the 3rd century had one ladder left for poor men. The army. He climbed it. Slowly, then quickly. Cavalry officer. Provincial commander. Then commander of the imperial guard under Emperor Numerian. He served in Gaul. He served in the east against the Persians. He learned the empire from the inside of a saddle, one frontier at a time. In November 284, Numerian was found dead in his litter. The cause was unclear. The blame, conveniently, fell on the Praetorian prefect Aper. The army gathered in Nicomedia to choose a new emperor. Diocles stepped forward, drew his sword, and personally executed Aper in front of the assembled legions. Whether Aper was guilty, we will never know. What we know is that on that day, a Balkan soldier became Emperor Diocletian. The name was a small revolution by itself. He had Romanized the Greek Diocles into something that sounded carved in stone, a new name for a new kind of rule. And he understood something his predecessors had refused to see. The empire was too big, too broken, too vast for one man. The frontiers stretched from Britain to the Euphrates. When a crisis erupted on the Rhine, the Persians invaded in the east. When the emperor rode east, Gaul rebelled. One man on one horse could not be everywhere, and every emperor who tried had ended up dead. The simple math of the empire was the mass of murder. Distance bred usurpers. Absence bred coups. So Diocletian did something no Roman ruler had ever willingly done. He gave away half his power. In 286, he raised his old comrade Maximian to the rank of co-emperor, and Augustus equal to himself, ruling the west while Diocletian held the east. It should have been impossible. 2 emperors meant 2 civil wars waiting to happen. But Maximian was a blunt instrument, a soldier who trusted his friend. Diocletian was the brain, Maximian was the fist, and for a while it worked. Maximian rode west with armies and a grudge against every rebel. He fought from the marshes of Gaul to the cliffs of the Channel coast. The usurpers fell one by one, Carausius in Britain, the Pagodae uprisings in Gaul, the desert tribes pressing against Egypt. Then in 293, Diocletian doubled down on his impossible idea. 2 emperors were not enough. He created 4. Each Augustus would have a junior emperor beneath him, a Caesar, who would govern part of the territory and one day inherit the throne. Constantius Chlorus served under Maximian in the west. Galerius served under Diocletian in the east. The Tetrarchy was born. The word means rule of four. To the Roman mind, it was almost blasphemy. Power had always been singular, jealous, indivisible. Diocletian had quartered it like a butcher dividing meat. 4 men, 4 capitals, one empire stitched together by trust, marriage alliances, and a shared belief that Diocletian was the one true center. Nicomedia in Asia Minor became his eastern capital, not Rome. Rome was a symbol now, an old goddess sleeping while younger cities did the actual ruling. Trier guarded the Rhine. Sirmium watched the Danube. Milan replaced Rome in the Western imagination. The empire had 4 hearts. And for the first time in living memory, all 4 were beating in rhythm. Messages flew along the imperial post roads. Couriers covered hundreds of miles in days. The 4 emperors moved like fingers on the same hand. The barbarians on the Danube were thrown back. The Persians were forced to negotiate. Britain was reconquered. Egypt was pacified. By the late 290s, Diocletian had achieved what no Roman emperor had managed in 3 generations. He had stopped the bleeding. Then he turned inward, because saving the frontiers was the easy part. He reformed the provinces, doubling their number to break the power of ambitious governors. He created a new bureaucracy, layered and watched. He reformed the coinage, trying to drag the silver content back to something believable. He reformed the tax system, building it around a fixed assessment of land and labor. In 301, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, an attempt to freeze inflation across the entire empire by imperial decree. It failed. Merchants hid goods rather than sell at fixed rates. Black markets bloomed. But the ambition of the thing was staggering. No ruler had ever tried to command an economy at that scale. He also rebuilt the image of the emperor himself. Gone was the old idea of the Roman prince as first among equals. Gone, too, was the easy access of earlier centuries. No more senators wandering into the palace. No more soldiers slapping the emperor on the back after a battle. Diocletian wore robes of silk and gold. He demanded that visitors prostrate themselves before him, foreheads to the floor. He took the title Jovius, linking himself to Jupiter. Maximian became Herculeus, the earthly Hercules. The emperor was no longer a man. He was a vessel of the gods. This was theater, but it was also engineering. A god could not be murdered by a rival general. A god stood above the squabbles of mortal ambition. For 10 years, the system worked beyond anyone's expectations. The empire was stable. The frontiers were quiet. The treasury was rebuilding. In 303, Diocletian and Maximian celebrated 20 years of joint rule in Rome itself. A triumph, a jubilee, a reminder that the old city still mattered. It was the last time Diocletian would ever see Rome. He hated it. The Senate's smug entitlement, the mob's demands. The city felt like a museum to him. And here, at the peak of everything he had built, something began to crack. Not in the empire. In him. The Iron Man was 60 years old. He had been fighting wars or running provinces for 40 of those years. The body was finally sending him a message the mind did not want to hear. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Diocletian saved Rome. There is no real argument about that. But to do it, he turned the emperor into a god-king, gutted the old republic's bones, and built the machinery that would later become medieval absolutism. So tell me in the comments, was Diocletian the man who saved Rome, or the man who finally ended what Rome was supposed to be? I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you have a favorite reformer emperor we should cover next, drop the name down there too. Now back to the story, because the cracks were about to become canyons. The first crack was personal. Diocletian fell ill in the winter of 304, seriously ill. For months, no one in the eastern capital knew if he would live or die. Rumors spread. Some said he was already dead and the court was hiding the body. When he finally appeared in public again in March 305, witnesses said he looked like a ghost. Something in him had changed. The Iron Emperor, who never seemed tired, had finally felt his own mortality. The second crack was religious. In 303, pushed by his Caesar Galerius and by his own growing rigidity, Diocletian had launched the Great Persecution. Christian churches were demolished, scriptures were burned, Christians were stripped of office, of rights, sometimes of their lives. It was the largest, most systematic persecution Rome had ever attempted, and it failed. The faith grew, the martyrs became legends. Within a decade, a future emperor would convert to Christianity and turn the whole policy upside down. Diocletian had picked the wrong enemy at the wrong moment. But the deeper crack was the one nobody saw yet. It was inside the Tetrarchy itself. The system depended on one thing: voluntary succession. The senior emperors would retire, the Caesars would step up, new Caesars would be chosen on merit. No bloodlines, no dynasties, no sons inheriting the throne. The empire would be ruled by the best, not the born. It was a beautiful idea. It was also, history would prove, a fantasy. Because Constantius in the West had a son, a tall, ambitious young officer named Constantine. And Maximian had a son too, named Maxentius. Both boys had been raised to expect the purple. Both had watched their fathers rule. Both had been quietly told the throne would one day be theirs. Diocletian did not care. In May 305, he did the unthinkable. He abdicated. In a ceremony at Nicomedia, he laid down the purple robe in front of his army. Maximian, reluctantly and bitterly, did the same in Milan on the same day. Constantius and Galerius were promoted to Augustus. Two new Caesars were appointed beneath them, handpicked by Galerius and acceptable to Diocletian. Constantine was not chosen. Maxentius was not chosen. Two princes were passed over for two outsiders. Diocletian got into a carriage and rode home to the palace he had been building for years on the Dalmatian coast, a fortress of a retirement home in the city we now call Split. He thought he had solved it. He thought the machinery would run on its own. He was wrong within a year. Constantius died in July 306 campaigning in Britain. His army, loyal to the family, did not wait for permission from anyone. They acclaimed Constantine emperor on the spot. In Rome, Maxentius watched his cousin take the purple and refused to be the only forgotten prince. He raised the city against the new Caesars and declared himself emperor too. Suddenly, there were 6 men claiming imperial titles. Galerius tried to crush them. He failed. His army deserted in Italy without a battle. The Tetrarchy was unraveling in real time, and from his palace by the sea, the architect watched. In 308, the surviving emperors met at Carnuntum on the Danube and begged Diocletian to come out of retirement, to put on the purple again, to fix what was broken. He refused. According to the ancient writers, he told him something close to this: "If you could see the cabbages I have grown with my own hands, you would never ask me to give up this piece for power." It is one of the most famous moments in Roman history, and it was also a kind of surrender. He knew the system had failed. He knew only force could fix it now. The cabbages were not a joke. They were a confession. A man who had carried the world for 2 decades had finally chosen the smaller, honest weight of a garden spade. He went back to his garden, and the wars he had spent his life preventing began in earnest. For the next 18 years, the empire tore itself apart. Constantine fought Maxentius. Maxentius fought Galerius. Galerius died. Licinius rose. Licinius fought Constantine. The Tetrarchy died piece by piece in battles at Turin, at Verona, at the Milvian Bridge in 3012, where Constantine, by his own account, saw a sign in the sky and chose Christianity. The faith Diocletian had tried to crush became the faith of the empire. By 324, Constantine had killed or outlived every other claimant. There was one emperor again, one throne, one Rome, exactly what Diocletian had tried to abolish. Diocletian himself did not live to see the final victory. He died around 311 or 312 in his palace by the sea in obscurity. Some sources say he starved himself, sick with grief at the destruction of everything he had built. Others say he simply died of illness and exhaustion. We cannot be sure. Legend says his last visitors found him thin and silent, staring out at the Adriatic. The sea he had grown up beside. The sea he had promptly come home to. But this much is certain. The man who saved Rome died watching Rome save itself by burning his life's work to the ground. And here is the strange, quiet truth of his story. He was not destroyed by an enemy. He was not betrayed by a friend. He was not overthrown. He was destroyed by the one thing he could not control: the ambition of men who had not been chosen. His fatal flaw was not pride or cruelty or paranoia. It was a kind of innocent faith, a belief that other men would love order the way he did, that a system designed for the good of the empire would be honored by people who had a chance at the throne. He misjudged human nature, and human nature won. Yet his shadow stretches across everything that came after him. Constantine's reforms, Christian Rome, the Byzantine court, even the medieval kings who claimed divine right. The rituals he invented for the imperial court, the prostrations, the silk, the language of the divine ruler, became the template for emperors and kings for the next 1,000 years. The provincial structure he designed shaped how Rome was governed until the very end. The tax system he built funded armies that fought long after he was dust. The bureaucracy he built outlived Rome itself. The Eastern Empire he reorganized would survive in Constantinople for more than 1,000 years after the West collapsed. His palace at Split still stands. People live inside it today. They hang laundry from his colonnades. They open shops where his guards once patrolled. Tourists wander through the basement where his wine was stored. Children play in the square where his throne room once stood. A cathedral was built inside his old mausoleum. A retired emperor's home became a city. Maybe that is the most fitting legacy a reformer could ask for. Not a tomb, a place where ordinary life kept going. The Tetrarchy failed. The man did not. Rome had been dying when he found it. He gave it another 2 centuries in the West and over a millennium in the East. Few rulers in human history can claim that arithmetic. And he did it without being a Caesar or an Augustus or an Alexander. He was a soldier's son from a coastal village who simply refused to let the world end on his watch. No poet wrote his epic. No marble face stares down from a famous arch. Most people who walk past his palace today could not tell you his name. But every modern bureaucracy, every divided court, every quiet succession of power owes him a debt it does not know how to pay. When he laid down the purple in 305, he became the only Roman emperor in history to voluntarily walk away from power and live to see what came next. He saw what came next, and it broke him, but he never reached for the throne again. If this story moved you the way it moves me, do me one small favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm these forgotten emperors deserve to be remembered. Subscribe if you want more like this. We are walking through the rise and fall of every great ruler history almost forgot, one cinematic story at a time. And drop a comment telling me which emperor, king, or conqueror you want next. Justinian, Aurelian, Belisarius, Theodora. I read every suggestion. Next time, we are crossing into the world Diocletian unknowingly created, the world of Constantine. The first Christian emperor, the founder of a new Rome, and the man who finished the job Diocletian started, then made it his own. Across in the sky, a bridge over the Tiber, a new capital rising on the shores of the Bosphorus, one man's vision becoming another man's empire. Because every empire is built by one man's certainty and unmade by another man's ambition. And the story of how Rome became Christian is darker, stranger, and more human than you have ever been told.